Hello friends, hope you're all well. Welcome to video 35. I'm creating this video in this series after long time, I think after 7 months. It's been an eventful period for all of us and I'm hopeful that all of you have coped up well with your own family, professional responsibilities and your portfolio. It's been really a memorable year, a year in which a lot of events happened. It gave a lot of lessons in terms of investing. I hope you had also seen my video which I had created on April 4, 2020 in the thick of COVID pandemic in terms of my approach to equity investing. Later on, I had also created a case study on some of the methods that I had talked about in that video, and I hope you have got value out of those. Purpose of this particular video is to provide a kind of framework for people who seriously want to study companies and invest. Now, there are people who depend on someone else's advice, maybe the analysts who create videos or who come on channels. But there are a lot of people like you who actually want to seriously study a company before you commit your money to investments. And therefore, I thought of putting together a framework in which a number of aspects, both financial and non-financial, can be seen together. And that's the purpose of this video. It's going to be a long video, but my sincere desire is you get tremendous value out of this big picture which I'm presenting before you. So I do look forward to your own comments and whether you got value out of what I'm presenting before you. But before I go to that framework, I'm also going to talk a little bit in about 8-10 minutes about this value versus price paradigm and how do we actually make an assessment of value and what kind of information do we actually keep track of. So let us talk about those aspects too. As I mentioned, and I'm repeating this, that this detailed video is to help astute investors in refining their investment strategy. Well, people who have just begun their investment journey, and I know during COVID pandemic, a lot more brokerage accounts got opened because a lot of youngsters felt that they want to put their money to work. Now, of course, there are a lot of these analysts who recommend stocks and who make comments and YouTube videos on a variety of stocks, and I respect their contribution. However, we need to understand the fundamentals, and my effort in this entire series is to talk about those principles rather than talking about specific companies. At some stage, I also want to do that, but I think time is still away. But even those who have just begun the journey, I think this may give them some interesting ideas. But obviously, those who don't have the patience, who just are looking for somebody's recommendation to buy a stock, I don't think this video is for them. I'm saying this respectfully, with all due respect, but this is essentially for people who are very serious and who want to put some good effort to actually make their money work hard. And once you start honing these skills, it's going to be lasting with you and it will give you a point of view which is going to just become better with every passing day and year. So we essentially invest where the value versus price paradigm is most favorable to us. In some of my past videos, I have talked about valuation. I have even prepared a video on case studies in terms of where the value versus price paradigm was most compelling. And I'll also try and create some more videos, trying to give you another perspective on those aspects. However, for now, I think it's quite sufficient to say that we buy a stock because in our perception, or you can say in your calculation, though those calculations are not easy, um, but at least we can make a fair guesstimate. In our guesstimate, the value is more than the price. That's the reason why we go and buy. Those who are selling at that time feel otherwise, and that's why they feel that the price is better than the value, and that's why they are coming and selling. Or they may find that there is some other stock where the value versus price paradigm is more compelling. Now we have no way to know, but we at least need to be very convinced that this value versus price paradigm that we have thought, we have looked at value from a variety of perspectives, and that's exactly the purpose of this video. We must always remember that value is future driven, because value we are paying today, or we are assessing today, and we are paying a price for future cash flows, and therefore the value is always future driven. In some of my past videos, we have already seen time value based valuation models, PE, EV, EBITDA, uh, PEG, which is also called as Power PE, and some of those aspects we have already discussed to be able to estimate value. However, we have to also continuously assess what is the company's preparedness and what is that the company is trying to do to continually enhance the value of the stakeholders. And therefore, because it is future focused, but as we're going to discuss later on, it is not static. This is something we need to continue to observe. So whatever framework I'm going to put before you is not for a one-time assessment. You can do one-time assessment before you invest in a stock, but the picture keeps on emerging, and as I'm going to share with you later on, you need to keep track of new information and then revisit this picture, say once in a quarter. And of course, in your mind, our mind is so powerful, it's God's gift that we are able to actually, tweak that picture on an ongoing basis. So that's something anyway we do, but at least formally we must visit once in 3 months to see whether our assumptions in terms of what the company is doing, or at least our analysis, is something which is really working in that direction. So, as I mentioned earlier, the value has to be harnessed by the management through strategic actions. And as I'm going to talk about in that framework, the strategic actions touch upon a variety of aspects, and you'll be actually amazed in terms of how many things I'm going to finally unfold on one slide, though actually I'm going to reveal part and part of that slide as we go along. But essentially, we have to make an assessment. What are the strategic actions that the management is taking to enhance the value, to protect the value on an ongoing basis? And this is something that is very vital for us to ensure that we are remaining invested in a company that is really worth it. So value is not static. It is being continuously discovered by the market. Information flow, therefore, is very vital. Finally, valuation is a result or a product of information on hand. And people who, access information on an ongoing basis are able to make a judgment about the value much better than those who are just passive investors who have just invested on the basis of some analyst recommendation, and then they would always look for somebody else's recommendation to decide whether one should remain invested or otherwise. But as I mentioned, this video is not for those. It's actually meant for people who want to consciously invest in companies, and that's where the financial and non-financial data which streams from the company becomes very, very important. And we need to keep track of this. One of the ways of keeping track also is you can actually set Gmail alerts on that company. That's a practice I follow. I've been doing it for many years, and that gives me ongoing feed about any new information that is happening in the respect of that company. And of course, periodic visits to the BSE or NSE websites where they file their information, of course, in addition to the quarterly data, is also very, very vital. So what we need to do is we need to put together a number of uh, moving parts and actually see what is the overall picture emerging, so that we could decide. The decision could be either to invest right now for the first time, or to remain invested, as the case may be, because sometimes there could be cases where you find that some of the basis of your investments are shaken. Like I'm going to talk about later on, you may suddenly find that there are some corporate governance issues. I remember there was a company which was in security solutions, and they were, for security of motorbikes, cars, and mobile phones, and so on. And they made a lot of tall claims, including exports to other countries and so on. And I used to keep track of, a variety of information. I used to even call their call center just to check how efficient they are in their service. But after I had seen their last two annual reports, there was a doubt in my mind, and I decided to go and attend the AGM and ask questions. And the way I got the answers, I realized that a lot of my doubts were actually getting confirmed, and the same day I had 8,000 shares of that company that time, and the prevailing price was 145. I sold all those shares in one day, and I'm very happy I did that. The price actually went up, so sometimes you feel that whether you made a mistake. It went up to 165 thereafter, and then last I saw was that it was delisted at 36 rupees. So actually my doubts were actually confirmed, but it took some time. But we need to act on alacrity moment we find that some of our basis or assumptions or assessment of our assessment of their value is actually shaken. It's much better that we exit from that investment rather than staying on. So as I already mentioned, we get streams of information. It could be annual report, periodic filings, analyst calls, quarterly results, the alerts that you put in, filings, whatever that information would be. You need to actually keep track and see whether there is anything which is changing for the positive or negative, the picture which I'm going to present to you in a comprehensive way, so that that helps you to make an assessment, and it tells you whether you should be exiting, you should stay invested, or you should be adding further stock. So as I mentioned, also learn this technique of creating targeted alerts. So the alerts can be in terms of press releases, it can be in the form of press reports, it can be videos, it can be, you can even set alerts on companies' leaders who may appear in media. So you don't have to unnecessarily waste your hours watching the media or hunting for data. A lot of that data can come to you at a periodicity that you can decide. It can be weekly, it can be monthly, it can be sorted according to your needs. So please explore this way of getting information, and what is really important is that we continuously assess this value creation paradigm of the company. So friends, welcome to the core of my presentation now. I actually elaborated this a little bit because unless I had elaborated this, the insight into what I'm going to present to you would not have been complete. So with that, let me now take you to that paradigm that I have kind of developed to be able to make a comprehensive assessment of the company, both from financial and non-financial perspective. Friends, you would agree with me that for any company, it is the customer which is really critical, and a customer is served through a product portfolio. So of course, as we go along, I'm going to elaborate on this product portfolio dimension, both from qualitative and financial perspective. But what I would make an opening remark is that finally the robustness of product portfolio of a company, whether it is goods or services or a combination of both, and the markets, which is essentially what creates opportunities for the company, and therefore the product portfolio is something very, very important. The second aspect is, what are the growth drivers for a company? What is the reason why this company has the potential to further grow? Is it because the company has still a lot of untapped markets? Is it because the company can extend its business to some of the allied businesses where it can have a lot of growth opportunities? Is it because it has a lot of export markets which are waiting to be tapped? What is the reason because of which this company can continue to grow for a long time? So we are not talking about growth over the next couple of years, but we are talking about growth over minimum a decade or more. So we need to be very clear why this company has the potential to grow. Where is this growth coming from? And this growth can't be cooked like what happened during the subprime crisis. The bankers kept on hunting for borrowers, and finally they compromised on the quality of borrowers, and that's why that crisis is called a subprime crisis. So this growth has to be something which is very natural. Now, of course, as the economy grows, the demand obviously for the company's products is going to grow. But competition also grows, and you will have emergence of newer competition. So unless these companies consciously working on new growth drivers, it's not worth we putting our money behind a company which does not have any robust growth plans. Third aspect, which is very important, and again I'm going to elaborate on each of these aspects as we go along, is the operational efficiency. The company has great products, company has potential to go into markets, but it also needs to have a very strong operational engine which is working. The operational engine could touch upon supply chain, it could touch upon manufacturing, it could touch upon service delivery, it could touch upon new product development, it could touch upon distribution, it could touch upon how well the company is able to ensure that the products are supplied without any kind of disruption and there is not a single customer lost because of absence of product. So the whole dimension of operational efficiency becomes very important, and we are going to elaborate on that as we go along. The fourth aspect is that does this firm have the ability to scale up? It could have a lot of opportunities in the marketplace. It could have a great product. But if it is not able to scale up for a variety of reasons, either the way because the business is structured, the balance sheet may be already swollen, and they may have already a lot of debt on their balance sheet. There could be a variety of reasons. But what we need to really see is that can this firm very quickly scale up? Because if it is not able to scale up, then in today's day and age, competition can very easily come in and grab market share. So can this firm scale up reasonably quickly is a very important issue. The fifth very important issue is the broader idea of financial management. Now I'll be elaborating on these dimensions, but these aspects are also very important because investors do not like companies which have great businesses but mess up in their balance sheet management. So financial management is something very important, and I'm going to elaborate on various dimensions as you're going to see. Sometimes, interestingly, the underlying assets of a company can also create value down the line. So we have seen examples of textile companies where the textile business was not doing so well, but they had underlying real estate which created an opportunity for them. This has happened particularly with companies which had presence in metro cities, for example. So there can be different underlying assets which can also create value down the line. And as an investor, I need to be aware of those also. Sometimes these underlying assets can also make a very compelling value proposition. For example, if you were to actually go through the balance sheet of a company and if you were to find that the company has a land bank which is currently being used as a part of its own facility, but the return on investment of that facility is not so great, but the underlying land itself could have appreciated significantly in value, which right now the market is not putting that appropriate value. So you have an option that along with buying a company which has reasonably steady cash flows, reasonably steady profitability, you also have a major compulsion in terms of investing because of the underlying asset. So if you are getting land at absolutely very low rate, then why would you go and invest in land somewhere else in the form of land? You would rather invest in this company because it has a lot of land and which can suddenly get discovered, or that land resource can be later on used easily for expansion, and that time when they charge for their products and services, they will have clearly a competitive advantage. So underlying assets, and again I'm going to talk about other dimensions also, that these underlying assets can also be value creators for us, and we need to be aware about that. Then I'm also going to talk about a number of hygiene factors which every company's management is required to take care of, and that's something I'm going to talk about later in greater detail. And of course, if you at any time feel that you would like me to create a video on any of those aspects, I'll be very happy to create separate videos on these areas in case you find that what I'm elaborating here is not sufficient. Now let's go back to the product portfolio. This product portfolios, the one very important issue to my mind is that whether this company has differentiated products. Products which are commoditized, which means they are like the competition, are not going to give any pricing power to this company. In fact, it will be driven completely by the market. It will have to accept the price. The price will be dictated by the competition. And that's not something worth it. We need to actually invest in a company which dictates price to the market. And that is possible only with differentiated products. So differentiation is a paradigm where a company is able to give more value, more bang for the buck. And this is something which is very vital. So we need to make an assessment, and again I'm going to unfold various ways in which we can try and make an assessment, both qualitative and financial, in terms of whether the company is consciously working on creating these differentiated products. So this is one very important dimension. The second very important dimension is I would trust a company which is itself investing in technology and research rather than a company which is continuously dependent on somebody else to source technology. And if you find, the company is paying royalty to some other entity, it clearly shows that there is a dependence, and such a company is going to be more vulnerable. On the other hand, you will find that there are a couple of Indian companies which are making mark globally, particularly in the two-wheeler space, where they have invested heavily into research and development themselves, and because of which they have been able to create superior products which are beating their competition, which is even Chinese competition, hollow, because they are charging a better price, but they are giving far more value to the customer from the perspective of the cost over the entire life cycle, or what is called as total cost of ownership. So the product overall, including the repairs and maintenance, costs much less, is far more rugged as compared to a competition which is selling those products cheap, but they involve a lot more repairs and maintenance. So they have been able to do this based on their own investment in technology and research. So these two aspects are very important in a product portfolio. In case of growth drivers, which are the newer markets which the company would be tapping, or is it planning to tap? So the new markets can be new market segments. New markets could be creating new market segments. New markets could be geographically new markets. So for example, if a company in India had a presence in West and South India, but it has not so far tapped the north and eastern part of India, then yes, of course, it can extend geographically. But interestingly, many Indian companies today provide this wonderful opportunity for Indian investors, because many of them are becoming multinationals now. And when they are becoming multinationals, they are actually making their presence felt in other geographies, other countries. And that's where they are creating opportunities for themselves. So by becoming an investor within India, we actually are accessing global markets, which are going to be growth drivers. Also, interestingly, some of the large Indian companies are also investing in startups, and that is also going to help them in creating new products. India, luckily, is becoming a startup, a hotspot, and which is great because these hotspots are creating technologies, are creating new business models, which large companies can take advantage of. Large companies can partner with them and create new markets. And that's going to be a very important growth driver. So here again, we clearly see that there could be a potential win-win for our companies, and that is something we need to analyze. Also, what is the new product pipeline that this company is creating? And that is only a result of its technology and research. So is it revamping its products in a way that they give superior value all the time? Is there a kind of a method in doing that, or is it something which is very random? How are they creating these new products? Are there products being created for different geographies? Because different geographies may have different needs. And are they offering a wide range while at the same time creating a specialization and a niche for themselves? So what is that this company is doing right, which is going to create a sustainable growth for us? So friends, these couple of points that you see are actually elaboration of the points which I have first presented vertically, like the product portfolio I have talked about in more detail in the context of product differentiation, its pricing power and technology. Growth drivers can arise out of new markets, new market segments, new products, and so on. or new geographies, as we talked about. So I'm elaborating horizontally these points which I have mentioned vertically in the first column. I'm just repeating this so that you get an idea that there is a theme in my entire presentation. Operational efficiency, one very important aspect is asset utilization. Quite often companies, expand a little mindlessly, in the sense that they get into what is called as greenfield expansions, which actually involve setting up a completely new plant or setting up new facilities, and that involves a much bigger investment. On the other hand, companies which are able to see whether they can do brownfield expansion, which means that they can expand in the same location either by reorganizing their existing facilities, debottlenecking, whatever that may be. But asset utilization can improve operational efficiency. It also improves the utilization of money which is invested. So asset utilization is a very important aspect. And in relation to that, the other very important aspect is how is it managing its operating cycle, the cycle of money getting converted back into money. The cycle of money involves halts at raw material stage, inventory in the form of work in process, in the finished goods and goods in transit. Finally, it becomes receivables, and finally, it becomes cash again. So this entire thing is captured through the supply chain and distribution aspect, and how well the company is doing that. And of course, there are some financial measures for it, which is what we will also talk about a little later. The other very important aspect in the context of ability to scale up is capacity management. Again, capacity management can be elaborated a great deal, but for now, I am only restricting my conversation in the context of scaling up. So one, of course, having a certain underutilized capacity is something which is helpful in the short term, but it is also very important that a company does not try and do everything by itself, but it rather creates a network of partners who are able to share the burden of their value addition process, and with the result that they can actually share the capacity and even capacity ownership instead of concentrating everything with itself. So for example, an FMCG company need not actually manufacture everything itself. It can leave the manufacturing to somebody else, it can leave the distribution to somebody else, it can leave the warehousing to somebody else, and it can actually focus on some of its own core competencies. Similarly, some of the construction companies, what they do is they don't necessarily invest in land banks, neither do they have their own construction apparatus. They actually only have people who can design, and then supervise the execution of projects. They will deal with the customers, they will create the marketing infrastructure, they will do the customer engagement, they will ensure quality. That's what they will do, but rest of the validation process they hand over to construction contractors and others. So capacity management need not mean that every capacity has to be owned by the organization. And how creatively does it manage its capacity? Also, retail chains don't necessarily have the entire manufacturing capability, right? They actually outsource the manufacturing, and sometimes the manufacturing is outsourced to somebody who is otherwise competing in the marketplace, right? But the manufacturing part is taken care of by them, and that is possible. Even this example of Kingfisher Airlines, which failed, when it was created, was actually or had rightly outsourced a number of its activities to Indian Airlines. For example, the entire MRO, the maintenance repairs overall of its aircrafts was outsourced to Indian Airlines, as an example. So there are ways in which one can ensure that capacity is available and one can easily scale up. So we need to be aware about how the capacity management is happening within the company. The other very important aspect is the cash holdings that this company has. Of course, I'm going to touch upon this aspect in a different way at a little later time. And friends, this is going to be a very detailed presentation. I won't be surprised if it becomes a 75-minute presentation, but I think this is worthwhile presenting all these ideas in one go, though it may try your patience, but I hope you'll get value at the end of it. So a company which sits on cash is able to do a lot more than a company which is, under a lot of borrowings. So a company with cash holdings may be able to, invest in another company which can certainly help it to improve its capacity, or it can help it to create new product pipeline. So holding cash on one's balance sheet, while shareholders don't like it too much that if a lot of cash is held by the company, but consciously managements hold cash because they may be already on the prowl looking for potential acquisitions, and that may not be still a public information. So any cash holding can help the company to very quickly grow, very quickly create capacity, uh, get a foothold in new geographies. It can also help in terms of taking stakes in startups, as I mentioned earlier, and create or access new technology. So cash holding on the balance sheet is something very important from the perspective of the ability to scale up. In the context of financial management, since we are talking about cash holdings, a wider umbrella is the balance sheet management. How well is the balance sheet managed? Now, again, this is a broad topic by itself, but very briefly, what I would also say is the balance sheet of a company bloated? What I mean is it holding so much of assets that because of which it has already organized a lot of financing, and therefore it has jeopardized its ability to raise further money, because it has lost credibility because of the money it has already raised, but it is not able to generate a superior return on investment. This has happened with a lot of hotel companies. They actually created bloated balance sheets, and then they faced challenges because suddenly there was a huge supply of rooms in India. A lot of foreign chains also entered. It created a lot of supply, and also newer business models in which hotels which were not on anybody's horizon suddenly uh, uh, propped up because of the hotel aggregators, hotel room aggregators, and therefore suddenly it created a pressure on what is called as ARRs, the average room rents, and therefore their entire assumption of investing in new hotels, new properties by borrowing money went completely haywire, and then they had to restructure their entire balance sheet. So how is their balance sheet speaking? I have already created videos in my Learning Finance series on some of the important aspects of balance sheet, and please explore that series also. I'll try and share some of those video links in the description box also. But it's very important that we understand how well the company is managing its balance sheet. The next important aspect is equity management. We as equity owners have left undistributed profits with the company. We may have even paid premium when we subscribe to IPO or rights issues. And the company has thus got equity, which is either arising out of the retained earnings or the share premium, and of course the share capital. Now, equity is the strength of the company. But at the same time, if the equity also gets bloated, the equity is not well utilized, the return on equity can suffer. And therefore, just like cash management is important, of course, I have created separate videos on cash flows and so on in my Learning Finance series. Again, those links I'll provide in the description box, so you can see those aspects. However, what I would say is that this equity management is also very important, about which I'm going to elaborate a little later down the line. But keep in mind that a bloated equity is not necessarily a good sign, because it also means that the management does not have clarity about how they want to use the shareholders' money productively, or they have already created assets which may not be generating superior returns, and particularly this age does not give any premium on unnecessary assets that a company is sitting on, unless that value is still undiscovered by the market, which is the next point I'm going to talk about. But if it is already known to the market, the company is well researched, and we find that it is not utilizing all its assets well, then that equity becomes a big challenge, and there will be always pressure on the management that you should return part of the cash back to the shareholders. But the management is also in a difficult position, because a lot of their money is blocked in assets and they're not able to liquidate that. So This aspect becomes very, very vital, and we will be talking about this more as we go along. In the context of underlying assets, I would like to talk about these two important points: land holdings and investment holdings. So as I mentioned earlier, a company which is not so well discovered by the market, so it could be a small cap, it could be a small mid cap, where you may find that not too many analysts are researching on it, but you may be able to come across a company where it has some land holdings, which even if you were to link it to the current market value of the company, it's like, you are buying land at absolutely throwaway prices. I think it's good to have an exposure to such a company if its underlying business is generating steady cash flows and steady profits, and it is likely to continue to do so. However, the return on equity is not too good, but because it has inherent land holdings, it can down the line create opportunities which we should not miss. So that's a stock that you may like to explore also as a part of your own portfolio. The other part is that quite often companies create new businesses and they become kind of holding companies. Of course, I want to create a separate video talking about holding companies in greater detail. I've already created one video about holding companies, but I would like to create a more detailed video on holding companies also. And some of the companies, while they have their core business within the company up and running, they also take stakes in other companies, and that can become valuable. Also, there could be pure play holding and investment companies which may be going at significant discount, and you would have you may have perhaps seen my videos on holding companies and the case studies how I could take advantage of the prices during COVID pandemic. Those videos I have already created, but the point I'm making is that investment holdings themselves can be value creators. And particularly if the holding company is going at a significant discount, uh, with the dividend changes in the, or rather the income tax related changes in the dividend, which is announced by companies, it is going to be, quite fascinating to invest in those companies, because suddenly you may find that they can give you excellent dividend yields. On top of it, they can also give you an upside of participating in the growth arising out of their investment holdings. So that's something I will talk about in a separate video. But if you need that video, I think you should put that comment, and only if I get a demand, I'll create that video. Otherwise, why to waste my time doing that? Now, friends, what you're going to see now is some of the aspects about product portfolio, differentiated products, technology and research. Those insights are more qualitative, and we get those insights from the management discussion and analysis, from interviews of their leaders during the investor calls, which I would encourage you to go and attend. So it's worthwhile registering for those calls and taking advantage of those calls, in terms of refining our own understanding of the company. But that is qualitative. But in addition, what should get reflected on the statement of P&L and elsewhere are the profitability numbers. So when you look at a profit ratio, and if you see it over a period of time, you should be able to see that this company, which says in its discussion and analysis that it is creating differentiated products, is it really improving its profitability year after year? Does it really have the pricing power? So if it has the pricing power, it is able to pass on the cost increases comfortably to the customer. Otherwise, and the customer is happy to pay for it. But if the company is not really having the differentiation and its own USPs, then it would reflect in the profitability numbers also. Also, see whether the company is continually investing in R&D expenses year after year, right? So this is something that we also need to see, and whether the spending is increasing. And some of that we can also see from the commentary or the presentations of the company in terms of what is the staff strength in the R&D function, as an example. but we can also get some of the data and calculate some of these ratios, right, and see for ourselves. One other aspect is the sales promotion spend by a company. If a company is required to spend a lot of money on sales promotion and advertising, it tells us that the seeming differentiation that the company is claiming actually may not be true, because if a company has to spend a lot on advertising and sales promotion, it actually tells us that it has a very weak competitive position, because of which it has to continue to hammer on the customers about its presence. Whereas a company which has created its own niches and pull factors, they don't have to advertise. People are going to go and buy those products. So sales promotion expense in such companies would tend to be low, and therefore their profit margin, their EBITDA margin will tend to be much better. In terms of growth drivers, we can also calculate a ratio of their exports to total sales, and also try and see. Now this is something which will not be available in the financial statements, but we can at least try and see from their commentaries what is the percentage of sales which is catered by new products. New products as in products which were created in last 2 or 3 years, because today with the advent of competition and technology, new products are emerging continuously. So competition is always going to seize the marketplace. So depending on the industry, it could be even new products introduced in last 1 year. But in reasonably stable industries, right, such as two-wheelers, we can, or four-wheelers, we can look at last 2 or 3 years new product introductions, and how much is the percentage of their sales to total sales. Also, we can look at specific brands and how much is each brand worth in terms of total sales. So that is something that we can also look at. Also, in certain industries like IT industry or IT related services or engineering services, customer acquisitions is a very, very important aspect. So new customer additions which have happened during the quarter, customers which give mega business to the company, those are all aspects which are very important. Again, don't forget that I am talking about the leftmost item here, which is the growth drivers. So growth drivers, the information such as customer acquisitions, new product sales, exports to total sales, overseas sales, because not all the sales will necessarily happen in the form of exports. If the company has subsidiaries abroad, what is the turnover of those subsidiaries in the context of the overall group turnover, including the turnover within India? So we may have to adjust the ratios depending on the nature of the company, but the idea here is that is the company growing in the new segments, new markets, new geographies? That's really very important. The operational efficiency is measured by inventory levels, receivable levels, the overall asset turnover. Again, I'm not elaborating a great deal because I've already created videos on this in my Learning Finance series, but very briefly I would say that a company which has a very strong market positioning, which has a strong operational efficiency, will tend to carry much less inventory. A large company such as Maruti Suzuki, which has a 50% market share in Indian passenger vehicles, has brought down their inventory many years ago from 30 days to 3 days. Now, if they can do that, I think it's an opportunity for many more companies, right? So inventory levels, what are their receivable levels? Receivable means money which is waiting to be collected from customers, and also the overall asset turnover. So sales in comparison with their investment in assets. Higher the turnover, the better it is. So these aspects, again, I have elaborated them in the ratio analysis in my Learning Finance series, but I'm just trying to give you a picture in the context of, what are the important driving factors. The other important aspect which also is very vital is debt equity ratio. If a company has already borrowed a lot of money and it has exhausted all its debt capacity, then its ability to scale up is going to be constrained unless they are able to raise further equity. Now, raising equity is not easy. It's not as easy as raising debt, and therefore there could be a lot of challenges for the company to expand if it has already exhausted its borrowing capacity, and therefore that is also a very important dimension of capacity management, right? One other important metric in my view is what is the ratio of outsourcing to sales. And outsourcing may not appear in the statement of P&L under the umbrella of the line outsourcing cost. It can appear in many ways. It can appear as third-party processing charges. It can appear as finished goods purchased, right? It can appear as subcontracting charges, right? So it can appear under different labels depending on the nature of the industry. But what we want to find out is how much is the outsourcing as a percentage of sales, and is it growing over the years? If it is growing over the years, then it is telling us that the company has a great ability to scale up, and it can scale up very quickly, right? So that's very important from our perspective. Also, one very important aspect of capacity is talent, people. And if a company is doing very well in terms of its own talent management, if it is being recognized for its prudent practices in the context of getting the best out of people, its people practices, then it also tells us that because it has access to a great talent pool, it can scale up very quickly. But if it doesn't have that talent pool, then even if there are market opportunities, externally hiring people cannot be a solution because it takes time to integrate them in the organization culture. So this is a qualitative aspect, and because it's a qualitative aspect, I have not captured in the same color as some of the financial numbers, as you can see, like the inventory levels, receivable levels, and so on. So I'm just making a distinction so that you are able to catch that. Then one very important aspect is what is the return on equity, return on capital employed, the cost of capital. So this is a very important dimension of financial management for any company. It's very vital that a company is able to improve its return on equity from year to year. It is able to improve its return on capital employed from year to year, and it's also able to bring down the cost of capital. So again, this is something which I have covered as a part of my videos elsewhere. But if you feel any more inputs are required, you can give your suggestion that I can think of adding that as a part of my later videos. This is something very important, leverage management. And leverages can create multiplier effects in terms of profits zooming, or it can kill companies. Now leverage is something very vital, and I promise that I'm going to create a separate video on that, because I want all of you to be aware about that. I think I have made a brief reference to the idea of leverage in the context of a video that I have created on the beta of a share. But anyway, it warrants a separate video on leverage, operating and financial and total leverages, and why companies have gone into distress because of this leverage. So that is something which is really worth creating a video. Though again, it is going to be a longish video, but I think it's worth it. So I promise I'll create a separate video on that. Then also the dividend and buyback policy is going to be very vital. As we have already seen, the taxation on dividends has undergone fundamental change, right? And earlier, a certain portion of that tax out of the distributable profits was taken away by the government. So now the overall dividend payouts of companies are going to go up, but the recipients, the individuals, are required to pay taxes. But if the recipient is the company, then the company can actually pass on those dividends to the shareholders of that receiving company. And this is where the great opportunity of investing in holding companies is going to come up, because if holding company is in a significant discount and it receives dividend from different streams, it is going to be able to distribute much larger dividend than its investee companies. And this is something which is still, in my view, not recognized by the market sufficiently enough. So therefore, I think it's worthwhile creating a more detailed video on that also, which again I intend to create. Now, one very important aspect when it comes to underlying assets is also capital allocation. So quite often what we see is that the company has certain segments or businesses which guzzle a lot of capital, right? They take away a lot of capital, but they are not able to generate sufficient returns. An example can be taken of ITC's investment in hotels. So while up to a certain stage, it was prudent that a portion of the cash that they were generating from their cigarette business was getting invested in hotels, they realized that the return on the specific segment was not keeping in line with the expectation of shareholders from the company as expressed in the cost of capital. So they then later on announced, a plan to actually get into what is called as asset right strategy. So whatever assets they have already created, those are iconic properties. They will continue to hold that, I believe. But of course, they may not now set up new properties. They would rather partner with people who are willing to invest in those properties and then manage those properties as a part of their own network. So capital allocation becomes very important. As a matter of disclosure, I don't any longer hold ITC shares. So that's something which I just wanted to make clear. Then what are the new strategic investments that the company is making? So is this company making investments which are going to bear fruit down the line? And how it is going to actually integrate that with its rest of its business? Now this is where a word of caution that quite often large scale investments happen by companies when the markets are booming. Now when markets are booming, to make strategic investments and get into major acquisitions is actually a big trap. Sometimes people try and think linearly in a way as if the boom times are always going to remain, but it never happens that way. Booms get into bursts, and if strategic investments are being made at a wrong time, then the leverage can actually come and kill. So this is something I'll anyway elaborate in a separate video. But on the other hand, if strategic investments are being made when the investee is in distress but has access to a lot of technology and can have a lot of potential, then that same new strategic investment can pay off in a very big way over a period of time. So we need to also make an assessment whether these strategic investments are happening at a time when the overall scenario of the economy is quite bad, but there are green shoots. So a company which is making investments at that time is actually going to bear a lot of fruit of that investment. So timing becomes very, very important. Also, whether the company divests businesses which do not meet its return expectations. So that is also something which is very, very important. So friends, I thought I would elaborate on those first 6 items. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to the hygiene factors, which are also very, very important. Friends, now let me come to some of the hygiene factors. So what I mean by hygiene factors is these are the factors which have to work on the background in a way that the company has to, and the board and the management has to take care of these aspects, such as cost management and risk management, for example. These two aspects are so important for cost competitiveness that even if the company is introducing new products, finally the customer is going to judge based on the price as well as the value. And cost management and risk management help the company in terms of creating a superior value for the customer. So a lot of initiatives are taken by companies for both these. Risk management is also now widely reported upon, but these things are extremely important. The other 3 things which are also becoming very important are what is called as ESG in investing: environmental impact, societal impact, corporate governance. Now, these things can't be taken for granted today. One can, of course, talk about these more in detail in the context of different industries, but it is very important that every company mitigates its environmental impact. It reduces any kind of a negative social outcomes. So societal impact also has to be seen. On the other hand, it should actively contribute to creating a positive impact on the society, and also raising the bar in terms of corporate governance. Of course, there are a lot of challenges in the context of corporate governance because of the inherent human nature that people at the top may tend to be greedy in terms of when it comes to their own selfish interests, whether when it comes to their own personal compensation, stock options, and also the inherent conflict which is created because the so-called independent directors are also rewarded so handsomely that they also risk getting compromised. So, of course, luckily SEBI has now initiated discussion on these aspects again, and which is very positive. And it's good that we are raising the bar of corporate governance anyway. Now, one other important piece is the use of data and technology. It has become so vital today that companies such as banks, NBFCs, which are sitting on piles of data, it really depends on how well they're able to utilize this data for the benefit of their business, right? So while they are not technology companies per se, technology is at their heart, because unless that data is harnessed and used for improving processes, that data is of no use. And we clearly see some banks and NBFCs score on this, right, which is very important. Now, lastly, friends, where we began today was from the left-hand side, where we talked about 6 important aspects: product portfolio to underlying assets. And here, I'm kind of summarizing those same aspects which I have elaborated through, 4 or 5 points each. I'm now kind of summarizing, saying that product portfolio actually creates barriers to entry. So competition cannot easily come in if you have differentiated products, if you have your own homegrown technology, right? Your profit margins are formidable, right? You are upping the R&D expenses, and you don't have to spend because you have created a pull factor. That itself creates barriers to entry and an economic moat for the company, and that creates a sustainable value proposition. Growth drivers, in addition to what we have spoken already, to what extent the company is innovating and also reimagining itself, in light of the changing milieu, and where would it see itself as the situation is externally changing. And companies which are able to do that start investing, way ahead in terms of time, and they completely reorganize themselves, reinvent themselves. And these aspects are also very vital from sustainability of growth drivers. Operational efficiency usually results in great customer reviews, customer delight, and today with social media, all of that is out in the open. And that is something which every company keeps track. And we as investors should also see to what extent the customers are delighted. Because finally, if the customers are delighted, then the company can continue to provide this value over a long period of time. Otherwise, its journey may get halted. So that is a very important piece. Ability to scale up also reflects in the ability of a company to create new concepts and take them to the market very quickly. So various aspects that we have spoken earlier create that capacity for the organization to be able to be very responsive to the market, whether it is the R&D, whether it is the manufacturing, whether it is the supply chain. All those aspects are very, very important. Financial management ensures investor delight. If you can see all these parameters, they are all helping the investors. So dividends, for example, the buybacks, the return on capital employed, return on equity, all these aspects are very important. The way the balance sheet is managed, all these things are very important for us as investors. And any company which manages this well provides investor delight. And land holdings, investment holdings, prudent capital allocation, new strategic investments which create new growth opportunities, strategic divestments, all these are very, very vital, and they create new values down the line, which today we may not be able to completely foresee. So that can provide investor top-ups. So friends, I hope you liked this 60-minute presentation, which provides you an overview of the kind of parameters that I personally try and look at in respect of a company that I invest in, and I hope it provided value to you. If it has provided value, please press the like button, subscribe to the channel. Also offer comments, they are really encouraging. Share the video with your friends. I'm also sharing it with you so that you benefit, and likewise I would request you to share it, and also do suggest topics which you feel I can add value, and that will be very that will be something that I'll be very happy to contribute. Thank you so much for your participation.